So right now there are three major visions for the world, okay? There's a Technate model, which makes North America, Greater North America, the focus of all world politics. There's Pax Judaica, which makes the Levant, Israel, the focus. And then there's the Third Rome, which is actually a Dugin's model. And the idea of the Third Rome is that Moscow would unite the Eurasian continent and create a new era of world peace, okay? So these are the three competing visions that we have right now.
So Jiang Xueqin just laid out three competing world visions that are reshaping global politics right now. This is the guy who correctly predicted Trump's Iran escalation back in 2024. And he's breaking down the real strategic battle happening behind the headlines. Let's see what he got right.
So I think the ceasefire is a reset because the Americans were clearly losing the war. They were on the back foot. And this ceasefire gives a chance for the Americans to reposition themselves, rethink their strategy, and go into phase two, right? So behind the scenes, we've been seeing a lot of movement. So the Indonesian defense minister visited Washington, D.C. and signed an agreement with Peter Hegseth, which will allow the Americans to use Indonesian airspace. And I believe that this is a movement towards full military cooperation with Indonesia, which will allow America to control the Strait of Malacca, right? So now the Iranians control of Hormuz. So the counter would be for Americans to take over the Strait of Malacca and trying to get about 80%.
Which is the biggest choke point in the world, right?
It is the biggest choke point in the world. It would collapse the East Asian economies if America were to choke it off. China gets about 80% of its oil from the Strait of Malacca, right? So the Strait of Malacca is a heavily contested territory. So that's one movement.
The Strait of Malacca handles $3.4 trillion in trade annually. That's 25% of all global commerce. If America controls Indonesia's airspace, they can choke off China's energy supply without firing a shot at Chinese ships. This is economic warfare disguised as Middle East strategy.
Another major movement that we've been seeing is that the George H.W. Bush, the third aircraft carrier, is now moving towards the theater. And it's bringing about 10,000 Marines into theater. And that would bring it to a total of 60,000 troops in theater. And when you have that many troops, you're going to use them for a ground incursion of some sort. Right? So that's number two. Number three is that in the home front in America, Trump has asked for $1.5 trillion in next year's Pentagon budget. He'll probably get it. There's now an automatic draft registration starting in December for young American men. The Pentagon has asked Detroit, General Motors, and Ford to start war munitions manufacturing.
That $1.5 trillion Pentagon budget is 50% higher than peak Iraq war spending. The automatic draft registration already started in December 2025, and GM just announced military production contracts. This isn't preparation for a limited Iran strike. This is mobilization for global conflict.
So Donald Trump, if you go back to the 1980s and you just look at his speeches about foreign global trade, about globalization, his position has remained consistent for the past few decades, which is that America is being manipulated, America is being scammed in this global trade, where the American consumer is taken advantage of, and America is buying too many things from the world, and the world is using these profits to fund their welfare state, especially Europe. He's talked about attacking Iran and stealing Iran's oil since the 1980s. There's this interview with Barbara Walters where he says, like if he were in charge, and this is like the late 80s, he'd go and take over Karg Island, right? Because all of Iran's oil is in Karg Island. So Trump, he's very much a mercantilist. He is very much a person who believes that global trade does not benefit America. He is an American firster. So during the early stages of his second term, he tried to impose tariffs on the world, right?
This historical consistency is key to understanding Trump's strategy. Karg Island produces 1.6 million barrels daily, 40% of Iran's oil exports. The fact that Trump identified this target in the 1980s shows his current Iran policy isn't reactive. It's a decades-old plan finally being executed.
So last December, the Trump White House issued the National Security Strategy. And if you just read it, it's very clear what the strategy is, which is America will treat the Western Hemisphere as its own territory, right? This is the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And so all the resources, including the lithium triangle in South America, which China heavily depends on for its AI and EV industries, including all the oil in Venezuela, they belong to America. And so everything that we're seeing right now fits into a national security strategy, including Trump's talks of annexing Greenland, including Trump's aggression towards Canada, including Trump's discussion of using special forces against Mexican cartels, his rhetoric against Cuba, the embargo against Cuba. You know, it's very possible that within the next month there'll be military action against Cuba, right? So it's all part of this national security strategy that Trump has laid out in December. And the other thing that about the national security strategy, which is very important, is that Trump talks about monetizing America's control over the seas, right? So rather than the American Navy protecting global trade, the American Navy will now impose tariffs on those who want to trade. Now, some will call this piracy, but from the Trump perspective, why should America pay for free trade over the seas? Let the world pay for it. So again, this is all part of the national security strategy.
The lithium triangle holds 60% of global reserves, essential for Chinese EVs and AI chips. Naval tariffs would generate $200 billion annually while crippling competitors. This isn't just mercantilism, it's weaponizing America's geographic advantage to restructure the entire global economy.
And the plan calls for America to extend into a continental fortress and annex Canada, Mexico, Greenland, Colombia, Venezuela. And then this becomes a self-sufficient fortress, which allows America to fully develop economically as well as trade with the rest of the world. So this is something called the technate. And it's something that Elon Musk is very much in favor of. In fact, it was Elon Musk's grandfather who was one of the early proponents of the technate. So you can make the argument that this is very much part of the grand vision for America in the 21st century. And certainly it makes sense because look at all the countries that Trump has gone into fights with these past 6 months, right? Canada, Greenland, Nicaragua, Honduras, Cuba, Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico. If you just look at the map, it's all in the technate.
It's interesting because these plans, I mean, this is plans like what, from the 1920s? The early
1930s.
Joshua Haldeman, Elon's grandfather, was a founding member of Technocracy Inc. in the 1930s, advocating continental resource management. The geographic pattern is undeniable. Every country Trump has targeted sits within the proposed North American technate boundaries. 3 generations of planning coming to fruition.
So I think there will be a lot of opposition towards Trump's plan, mainly from the globalists, right? When I mean globalists, I mean City of London, Wall Street, who control the EU, who control NATO. This is still a very powerful force in the world. They still control the deep state in America. So if Trump moves ahead with his plan, then we can expect economic sabotage in America, where the globalists are going to intentionally destroy the American economy, cause a crash in the American economy, and then maybe organize protests, anti-war protests, which would possibly lead to a civil war. So I think that right now Trump is trying to move towards a natural draft, and we can expect that if that were the case, then these billionaires, these oligarchs, would happily fund national protests against the national draft because they see that as possibly a pressure point on Trump's plan.
We're already seeing this play out. Congress just blocked Trump's war powers expansion, while Wall Street firms are quietly divesting from defense stocks. The City of London loses trillions if dollar-based trade gets replaced by continental resource backing. The resistance is mobilizing exactly as predicted.
So in the first Trump administration, his election caught everyone by surprise. If you go back to the Republican primaries, Hillary Clinton, the Clintons were going their way to root for Trump. They were doing a lot to help Trump win that nomination because they knew that Hillary Clinton would clinch the Democratic nomination and she would be a historically unpopular candidate. So they need someone from the Republican faction who would be even more unpopular than Hillary Clinton. So they actively worked to promote Trump's victory. And so everyone was taken by surprise, especially Washington, D.C., when Trump won in 2016. And that first term, everyone in Washington, D.C. did as much as possible to sabotage his administration, including his own administration, right? I mean, like think about the turnover in that first administration compared with like his second administration. There was Russiagate, where the mainstream media was promoting this hoax that Trump is a Putin agent. And there was just a lot of sabotage. There was so much leaks during the first administration. So Trump couldn't get anything done.
The Podesta emails confirmed Clinton operatives promoted Trump in 2016 primaries, thinking he'd be easier to beat. But the establishment's complete accommodation in his second term, no investigations, no leaks, compliant media, proves something fundamental changed. The deal is real.
So I think the empire, the deep state, whatever, okay, had a conversation with Trump, and at this time Trump was bankrupt. He was under siege because of lawfare. His house, Mar-a-Lago, was raided by the FBI. His daughter, Ivanka, basically abandoned him. So he was in a lot of trouble. And I think he made a deal with the deep state that when he came back into power, then he would be the agent of empire, basically a scapegoat for empire, who would promote imperial interests around the world. And that's exactly what he's been doing these past couple of years, right? And what's really striking is not only have the mainstream press, not only have they been more reserved in the criticism of Trump, but the Democrats have done nothing at all to stop Trump's imperial push.
Compare this to 2003, when millions protested the Iraq invasion. Now, silence. Democrats aren't even holding hearings on Iran escalation. The same party that investigated Trump for 4 years is rubber stamping his war plans. That level of institutional alignment doesn't happen naturally.
I think it's over. I think it's done. I think the United States has conveyed to the world that they're willing to burn it down in order to maintain its empire. Iran has signaled that it is willing to die to maintain its sovereignty, including destroy the global economy. So the reality is that for the United States to defeat Iran, it has to sacrifice its GCC. Once the GCC is sacrificed, then the world loses 20% of cheap energy. You're gonna have mass starvation throughout the world. But I think that die has been cast. I think we've crossed the Rubicon. There's no turning back.
The GCC produces 21 million barrels daily at $30 per barrel. Current oil prices hit $180 after the Iran strikes. Russia and Belarus supply 40% of global fertilizer, both now under total sanctions. Food prices up 300% in 6 months. Both sides chose economic apocalypse over backing down.